There are silences that weigh more than words, and the silence I kept that day in front of my husband's grave was the heaviest of my life. My name is Eleanor Hayes. I'm 65 years old, and this is the story I need to tell. Not out of revenge, but because there are lessons that are only learned when they hurt. It all started the day we buried Robert, my husband of 42 years. 42 years of laughter, tears, coffee in the morning, and hands clasped while sleeping. 42 years that went by in a flash when his heart decided to stop one October afternoon. Now, if you enjoyed this story, please subscribe and let me know in the comments what details made your jaw drop. Oh, and don't forget to become a member to see the exclusive videos that I don't post here. I'll be there for you. The ceremony was simple, just as he would have wanted. White flowers, soft music. Our son Jason arrived with Tiffany, his wife. She was wearing a black dress that was too tight for a funeral, but I didn't say anything. I never said anything. After the burial, we all returned to the house. My house. That 2-story house with a central courtyard that Robert and I bought when Jason was just a baby. The walls held 40 years of memories. Christmases, birthdays, rainy afternoons playing dominoes on the wooden table. I was serving coffee when I heard Tiffany's voice in the living room. "Jace, we need to talk to your mom about the house." My hand trembled. I almost dropped the cup. "Now?" Jason asked uncomfortably. "It's the perfect time, while it's fresh," she insisted. I entered the room with the tray. Tiffany looked at me with that smile that never reached her eyes. "Mother-in-law, sit down. We want to talk to you." I sat down. Jason looked at the floor. Tiffany took a breath and blurted out the words like someone suddenly ripping off a Band-Aid. "Mrs. Hayes, we know this is a difficult time, but we have to be practical. This house is too big for you alone. Maintenance, stairs, everything is dangerous at your age." I felt the air become heavy. "We saw a very nice assisted living home in Coastal Haven," she continued. "It has gardens, nurses, activities. You'll be better taken care of, and we can sell the house, help you with expenses, and, well, it would also be good for the apartment we want to buy." I looked at my son. I hoped he would say something, defend me, remember the afternoons his father taught him to ride a bike in that very yard. But Jason just nodded slowly, without looking at me. "Mom, Tiffany is right. You're going to be better. We'll visit you often." I didn't respond. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just kept silent. A silence that they interpreted as weakness. But I already knew something they didn't. The truth has its own time, and that time was about to come. Sometimes we trust too much in those we think love us. Have you also been disappointed by someone in your own family? Tell me your story in the comments. I want to read you. The following days were strange. The house still smelled like Robert, his lotion in the bathroom, his coffee in the kitchen, his folded newspaper next to the living room chair. But now there was a new silence, a void that was not filled with anything. Jason and Tiffany left that same night. She hugged me at the door with that cold hug of commitment. "Think about it, Mrs. Hayes. It's the best thing for everyone." I closed the door and was left alone. I walked through the house as if I was seeing it for the first time. Every corner had a memory. The patio where Robert planted the oak tree that now grew enormous. The kitchen where he waited for me every morning with 2 cups of freshly brewed coffee. The table where we played dominoes on Sundays, jokingly argued about who was cheating. Robert wasn't perfect, but he was mine. We met in 1979 at a party. I was 18, he was 23. He was a civil engineer, hard-working, serious. He wasn't the most handsome, but he had that shy smile that disarmed me from day one. We got married 2 years later. We bought this house with a loan from the bank and our savings together. He worked long hours supervising construction sites. I taught elementary school at a neighborhood school. The house was small. It only had 1 floor at the time, but we grew it as our family grew. When Jason was born, Robert built the 2nd floor with his own hands. I remember him standing on the scaffolding with the yellow helmet, shouting at me from above, "Ellie, come see! From here you can see the whole neighborhood." I carefully climbed up with Jason in my arms, and the 3 of us looked at the horizon as the sun set. Those were good days. Simple days. Days where you didn't need a lot of money to be happy. Robert taught me to appreciate the small things. The smell of freshly baked bread, the sound of rain on the roof. our hands clasped together as we watched television. "Ellie," he told me, "what's important is not what you have, but who you share it with." And he was right. Years passed. Jason grew up, graduated from college, met Tiffany, and got married. We were left alone in the house, but we never felt empty. Robert retired at 60, I at 62. We had a quiet routine. He got up early, made coffee, read the newspaper. I watered the plants, cooked, watched my shows. In the afternoons, we went for walks in the park. At night, we played dominoes. Life was perfect in its simplicity. Until one October afternoon, while pruning the oak tree, Robert put his hand to his chest and fell to his knees. "Ellie, I can't breathe." The heart attack was sudden. There was no time for long goodbyes. He only managed to take my hand in the ambulance and whisper, "Thank you for all, my love." And he left so quickly, so cruelly. Now, alone in the house, sitting in his armchair, hugging his pillow that still held his scent, I wondered how it was possible that my own son wanted to take away the only thing I had left of him. I looked at the photograph we had on the shelf. Robert and I, on our wedding day, young, smiling, unaware of what life had in store for us. "Robert," I whispered, "what do I do?" And even though he couldn't answer, I felt his voice in my memory. "The truth always comes out, Allie. Just be patient." I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and decided to wait. The first crack appeared 3 days after the funeral. Jason arrived, alone, without Tiffany. That gave me hope. I thought he came to apologize, to tell me that he had thought things over, that the house was mine, and that he would never abandon me. How wrong I was. "Mom, I brought you some flyers," he said, taking some colorful papers out of his backpack. They were from the assisted living home, Golden Spring Residence. On the cover was a smiling lady in a perfect garden surrounded by flowers and other senior citizens. "Look, Mom, they have a pool, yoga classes, recreational activities. It's like a hotel," he insisted, pointing at the photographs. I took the leaflets with trembling hands. "Jason, I don't want to leave my house." He sighed, that tired sigh that hurt me more than any scream. "Mom, you have to understand. This house is very big. What happens if you fall on the stairs and no one is there? What happens if you get sick at night? I have a phone. I have neighbors. I have you," I replied, my voice breaking. "I work, Mom. Tiffany, too. We can't be coming all the time. And with the children—" He stopped. He didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. The children. Tiffany was 3 months pregnant. I knew it, even though they hadn't told me yet. A mother always knows. And now it all made sense. They needed money, a bigger apartment, a new life. And I was in the way. "Have you already spoken to a lawyer about the inheritance?" I asked, trying to remain calm. Jason tensed. "Well, Dad left everything in order. The will is read next week, but anyway, Mom, the most logical thing to do is to sell. You get your share, we get ours, and everyone wins. Their part, our part, as if it all came down to numbers." "Your father built this house with his hands," I said, pointing at the walls. "He built the second floor alone, brick by brick, don't you remember?" Jason looked away. "Yes, Mom, I know, but Dad is gone and life goes on." Those words fell like stones on my chest. He stayed a while longer, talking about the assisted living home, the costs, how practical Tiffany was, and how they would take care of everything. I just nodded without really listening. When he left, I was left holding the leaflets. I walked to the patio. The oak tree that Robert planted was full of life. I took one, felt its scent fill my senses. It was then that I noticed something I had never seen before. At the base of the tree, between the roots, there was a small metal plate buried. I cleaned it carefully and read the inscription, "For Ellie, my love. This house is yours, always was, always will be, R." I felt like the world stopped. Robert knew it. He knew this day would come and had left me a sign. That night I couldn't sleep. I thought about my son, how he had changed, how the boy who played in this yard, who laughed while chasing butterflies, who hugged me while crying when he fell, had become a man who looked at me as if I were a nuisance. When did I lose my son? Or did I never really have him? As I tell you all this, I think about where you'll be listening to me. Have you also felt that a child walks away when you least expect it? Write the name of your city in the comments. I want to know where they listen to me. The days dragged on heavily, as if time itself had become thick. After finding the plaque on the oak tree, something changed inside me. But it wasn't strength. It was fear. Fear of losing my son. Fear of being completely alone. Fear that if I refused, Jason would disappear from my life forever. So I did what so many women of my generation learned to do. Be quiet, smile, and submit. Tiffany started coming more often, always with excuses, like bringing things, checking the garden, or measuring the rooms. But I knew what she was really doing. She was taking inventory, calculating how much each thing was worth. One afternoon, she arrived with a notebook and a camera. "Mother-in-law, do you mind if I take some pictures? It's to, keep track of everything." She didn't ask my permission. She was actually already photographing the room when she finished speaking. I made coffee as usual, as if everything were normal, as if it didn't hurt to see that woman measuring with her eyes every piece of furniture, every painting, every memory. "This antique display case must be worth quite a bit," she commented, touching the glass of the cabinet where Robert kept his collection of miniature cars. "At an auction, you could get good money." I squeezed the coffee cup between my hands. "My husband made that display case," I said softly. "He built it when Jason turned 10. He spent months sanding the wood, polishing every detail." Tiffany barely heard me. Yeah, but you still have to sell it. In the assisted living home, you won't have room for so many things, Mrs. Hayes." I looked down. I didn't answer. That night, Jason arrived with documents. "Mom, I need you to sign this." "What is it?" "It's a power of attorney, so I can do things on your behalf. Sell the house, manage accounts, that sort of thing. It's to make your life easier, Mom." I looked at the papers. The letters were blurry. My heart was beating too fast. "I can't wait for your father's will to be read." "Of course, but this speeds everything up. Also, the notary charges by the hour, Mom. Each appointment costs money." It was always the same. Money, as if money could buy 40 years of memories. "Let me think about it," I whispered. Jason became impatient. "Thinking what, Mom? It's for your own good. Or do you think we want to rob you? You are my mother. I would never hurt you." Those words burned me because deep down, a part of me was beginning to doubt. Over the next few weeks, I became a shadow in my own home. Tiffany would come with decorators and let them in without asking my permission. "It's just to calculate the remodeling. That way the house will sell faster," she explained. I took refuge in my room, listening to their voices downstairs talking about colors, styles, prices, as if I didn't live there anymore, as if I were already dead. One morning, Tiffany entered my room without knocking. "Mrs. Hayes, we need to talk about your things." "My things?" "Yes, you have to start packing the essentials. There's only one small room in the assisted living home. It won't fit all of this." She pointed to my closet, my photographs, the boxes where I kept the letters Robert wrote me when we were dating. "What am I going to do with everything else?" I asked, feeling a lump in my throat. Tiffany shrugged. "We can have a garage sale or donate it, whatever you prefer. Sell the memories, donate them like trash." That afternoon, when everyone had left, I went down to the patio. I sat down next to the oak tree and touched the plaque Robert had left for me. "This house is yours. It always was. It always will be." I cried. I cried like I hadn't cried since the funeral. I cried for Robert, for myself, for the son I was losing without understanding how, but still didn't have the courage to face them. Not yet, because a part of me was still clinging to the hope that Jason would reconsider, that one day he would wake up and go back to being the boy who hugged me before sleeping. The boy who told me, "I love you, Mom," without anyone asking him to. So I kept quiet, kept smiling, kept saying yes to everything. I signed papers I didn't understand, assented to plans that broke me inside. I let myself be carried away like a leaf in the wind, until the day of the will reading arrived. Attorney Sterling, Robert's lawyer, summoned us to his office on a Tuesday morning. I arrived early. Jason and Tiffany arrived together. She was wearing a bright red blouse, too cheerful for the occasion. We sat across from the attorney's desk. He was an older man with thick glasses and a calm voice. He had been a friend of Robert's for 30 years. "Good morning," he greeted, looking at me with a warmth I hadn't seen in weeks. Mrs. Hayes, how are you? Fine, sir. Thank you. Tiffany cleared her throat impatiently. Shall we begin? Mr. Sterling looked at her seriously. Of course. He opened a brown folder, took out several documents, and then began to read. I barely listened. The words jumbled together in my head until the lawyer uttered a phrase that changed everything. And regarding the property located at 243 Oakwood Drive, Highland Park, I wish to clarify the following. Jason leaned forward. Said property was acquired in 1982, exclusively in the name of my wife, Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, with her own resources obtained from the inheritance of her late father, Mr. Ernest Hayes, Sr. I, Robert Hayes, have no legal right to this property, as my wife wisely registered it as her own private property before our marriage. Therefore, the house is, and always has been, the exclusive property of Eleanor Hayes. The silence that followed was deafening. Tiffany paled. Jason opened his mouth, but not a sound came out. The lawyer continued. I ask my son Jason to respect this wish and never, under any circumstances, attempt to deprive his mother of what rightfully belongs to her. The house is her refuge, her history, her right. And if one day she decides to leave, let it be of her own free will, never under pressure. Jason's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were of shame. Tiffany stood up abruptly. This is a mistake. There must be a mistake. Lawyer Sterling stared at her. There is no mistake, madam. Everything has been duly certified and registered with a notary for 43 years. I remained silent, motionless, feeling the truth breaking through like light after a storm. I still wonder if I was right to run aground for so long. And you, have you ever remained silent when you should have spoken? Tell me in the comments. The silence in Mr. Sterling's office was so dense it seemed to have weight. Tiffany remained standing with her hands clenched in her bag, her face red with suppressed anger. Jason sat with his head down, tears rolling down his cheeks without him doing anything to stop them. I didn't move. I didn't say anything. I just waited. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat and continued reading other aspects of the will. The bank accounts, the savings, some minor investments. All of that would be divided between Jason and me, as the law dictates. But the house, the heart of it all, was mine, only mine. When Mr. Sterling finished, he closed the folder with a smooth movement and looked me straight in the eyes. Mrs. Hayes, her husband, was very clear. He wanted to protect her, and he succeeded. I nodded, barely feeling a lump in my throat. Robert always knew. Always. Tiffany was the first to react. And how much is the house worth? She asked in a voice too loud for the closed space. The lawyer looked at her coldly. That's not my concern, ma'am. The property belongs to Mrs. Hayes. She will decide what to do with her assets. But Jason is her son. He has the right. He has the right to the inheritance that is due to him by law, the lawyer interrupted. But the house was never part of the marital property. It was acquired by Mrs. Hayes before she married with money from her own family. There's nothing to claim. Tiffany opened her mouth to respond, but Jason stopped her by touching her arm. Yeah, Tiff. Yeah. She glared at him furiously, but held back. She grabbed her bag, turned, and left the office, slamming the door so hard that the diplomas on the walls rattled. Jason sat there, not looking at me. His hands were trembling on his knees. Mom, I didn't know. My voice came out firmer than I expected. You didn't know what, Jace? That the house was mine? Or didn't you know that trying to kick me out of my own home was wrong? He shuddered as if I would have slapped him. I thought, Tiff said it was the best thing for you, that you'd be safer. Safer or further out of the way? Jason covered his face with his hands. His shoulders were shaking. Forgive me, Mom. Forgive me. I wanted to hug him. I wanted to tell him everything was okay, that I forgave him, that we could forget all this. But something inside me had broken, and I knew words wouldn't be enough. This time I got up slowly, grabbed my bag, and headed for the door. When you're ready to really talk, Jace, when you're able to look me in the eyes, you scoundrel, I'll be there. But now I need time. I left the office without looking back. Outside, Tiffany was leaning against the car, smoking a cigarette. When she saw me, she brusquely put it out. Happy, Mrs. Hayes? I didn't respond. I walked toward the street to hail a taxi. She followed me. You know what? You are selfish. Your son needs that money. We're going to have a baby. But no, you prefer to stay in that old house clinging to the past instead of thinking about your grandson." I stopped. I turned around slowly. "Tiffany, that old house, as you call it, was built with my husband's sweat and my life savings. It's the only place in the world where I can still feel Robert near, and I'm not going to give that up for money. Ever. But we need it. So, work like Robert and I did, like everyone else does." Tiffany looked at me with such intense hatred that it scared me. "This isn't going to stay like this," she hissed between her teeth. "It's a threat." She didn't respond. She just turned around, got in the car, and drove off, leaving a cloud of black smoke. I took a taxi back home. The whole way my hands did not stop shaking. Not from fear, from something deeper, from liberation mixed with sadness. When I got to the house, everything looked the same. The oak tree, the yard, the windows. But something had changed. I had changed. I went in, locked the door, and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. Then I walked to the yard, knelt down by the oak tree, and touched the license plate. "Robert, thank you. Thank you for taking care of me even after you left." The next few days were strange. Jason didn't knock, didn't come. It was as if he'd disappeared. And even though it hurt, a part of me needed that space. Tiffany, on the other hand, didn't stay still. One afternoon, the next-door neighbor, Mrs. Carol Jenkins, knocked on my door. "Ellie, can I come in?" "Sure, Carol, come in." We went into the kitchen. I served her coffee. She looked uncomfortable. "I don't know if I should tell you this, but your daughter-in-law came yesterday." I felt a chill. "Tiffany here?" "Yes." She knocked on my door. She told me she was worried about you, that you've been acting really weird since Robert died. She asked me if I'd seen you confused, forgetting things, talking to yourself. I froze. What did you say to her? I told her the truth, that you look perfectly fine, more lucid than many 40-year-olds, but I kept thinking, Ellie, what is that girl up to? I understood. So Tiffany was sowing doubts, trying to construct a narrative that I wasn't in my right mind, that I needed a guardian, that I wasn't capable of making my own decisions. Carol, if anyone else asks you about me, please tell them the truth. I'm perfectly fine. She took my hand. I know, friend. And don't worry, everyone in the neighborhood knows you. No one is going to believe her lies. After Carol left, I sat in the living room thinking, Tiffany wasn't going to give up. That was clear. And Jason, my poor Jason, was trapped between his mother and his wife. That night, the phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated but answered. Mrs. Eleanor Hayes? Yes, who's speaking? Good evening. I'm calling from the Golden Crest residence. Your son Jason Hayes made a reservation in your name. I wanted to confirm his admission for next week. I felt my blood run cold. There must be a mistake. I didn't make a reservation. According to our records, his son signed as legal guardian and paid the deposit. He also sent a copy of a power of attorney, the power of attorney they'd pressured me to sign weeks ago. Cancel that reservation immediately, I said in a voice I didn't recognize as my own. I'm not entering any assisted living home, and if my son does anything like that again without my consent, I will take legal action. There was an awkward silence on the other end. Understood, ma'am. I'll cancel the reservation. I'm sorry for the confusion. I hung up the phone with trembling hands. There was the proof. Jason and Tiffany hadn't accepted defeat. They were moving pieces behind my back, using documents I had signed when I still blindly trusted them. I sat down in Robert's chair, closed my eyes, felt his presence like so many times before. Robert, what do I do? And this time the answer came clearly to my mind in his calm, wise voice. Defend yourself, Ellie. Defend what is ours. Don't be afraid. I opened my eyes. The moon was coming through the window, illuminating our wedding photograph. I picked up the phone and dialed Mr. Sterling's number. Good evening, Mr. Sterling. This is Eleanor Hayes. I need your help. I need to cancel a power of attorney, and I think I'm going to need legal protection against my own family. On the other end of the line, the lawyer sighed sadly, but answered firmly. Mrs. Hayes, I'll be in my office first thing tomorrow. We're going to protect your assets and your dignity. I promised Robert, and I promise you. That night, I slept restlessly, but for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel alone. I felt that Robert was with me, and that the truth was finally coming out. Have you ever had to defend yourself against the people who are supposed to be looking out for you? Sometimes the greatest pain comes from where you least expect it. If this story is touching your heart, leave me a comment. I'd like to know that I'm not alone. The next morning, I arrived at Mr. Sterling's office before it opened. I waited on the sidewalk watching the city wake up. The coffee shops opening, the children walking to school, life going on as if nothing had happened. But for me, everything had changed. Mr. Sterling arrived at 8 o'clock sharp. When he saw me, his expression softened. "Mrs. Hayes, please come in." In his office, I told him everything. The call from the assisted living home, the power of attorney they'd made me sign, Tiffany's visits asking the neighbors about my mental health, the decorators measuring my house without my permission. Mr. Sterling listened silently, taking notes. When I finished, he took off his glasses and carefully cleaned them. That was his way of thinking. "Mrs. Hayes, what you're describing to me is a systematic attempt to strip you of your autonomy and your assets. It's serious, very serious. Can I do anything?" "Of course. First, let's annul that power of attorney today. Second, I'm going to draft a document where you explicitly declare that she is of sound mind and that any attempt to have her admitted or dispose of her assets without her consent will be considered fraud." I nodded, feeling immense relief. "And Jason?" "He signed for you at the assisted living home. With a revoked power of attorney, that action is without legal effect. But there's something else we must consider, Mrs. Hayes. Your son, although influenced, made decisions, signed documents, lied on your behalf. That can't be ignored." The words hurt me, but I knew they were true. We spent the whole morning going through the motions. We went to the notary, I signed documents, I gave my testimony. The lawyer was clear. My mind was perfectly lucid, my will was firm, and no one had the right to decide for me. When we left, it was already noon. The lawyer accompanied me to take a taxi. "Mrs. Hayes, be careful. When people feel they're losing control, they can become unpredictable. If you need anything, call me anytime. Thank you, counselor, for everything." I returned home exhausted, but calmer. At least legally, I was protected. I went in, left my bag on the table, and went to the kitchen to make myself some tea. That's when I noticed something strange. The drawer where I kept important documents was ajar. I always left it closed. I approached with my heart racing. Everything inside was in disarray. The house deeds, birth certificates, insurance policies. Someone had gone through everything. I ran to my room. The drawer in my nightstand was also open. My jewelry, the little I had, was still there, but the envelope where I kept some cash was empty. It wasn't much, $500 that I kept for emergencies, but it wasn't the money that hurt. It was the invasion, the betrayal. Someone had entered my house, and I knew who. I checked the doors, the windows, everything was locked. Then I remembered. Jason had a key. I'd always had a copy since he was a teenager. I felt nauseous. My own son had entered my house like a thief. I sat up in bed, breathing deeply, trying to calm down. It was then that I saw something I hadn't noticed before. On my nightstand, next to the phone, was a note. The handwriting was Jason's. "Mom, I came to get some papers from Dad that I needed. I borrowed a few dollars because Tiffany needed to buy things for the baby. I'll pay you back soon. Forgive me for everything. I know you're angry, but I'm still your son, and this coming baby is your grandson. Don't turn your backs on us, Jace." I read the note 3 times. Each word was a stab. I borrowed, as if entering your mother's house without permission and taking money was simply borrowing. Don't turn your backs on us, as if I were the one who had abandoned someone. I crumpled the note in my fist. Tears began to fall without me being able to stop them. How had it gotten to this? Like the child I had raised, breastfed, cared for through every illness, had become this. I remembered then something Robert told me when Jason was small. "Ellie, a son is not only what you teach him, it's also what he decides to be. And sometimes those decisions break your heart." I never understood those words, until now. The phone rang. It was Mrs. Carol Jenkins, my neighbor. "Ellie, are you okay? I saw Jace enter your house this morning. I thought you had already reconciled, but you looked so upset when you returned that—" "What time did you see Jason?" "Around 10 in the morning. He entered with the key, was there for about 20 minutes, and came out with a box." "A box? What else had he taken?" I hung up and ran to Robert's study. It was a small room where he kept his things: diplomas, photographs of his construction projects, tools, books. Robert's toolbox was gone. That red metal box he had used for 40 years, filled with screwdrivers, hammers, wrenches, his most prized possession. He had taken it without asking, without explaining. I slumped into the desk chair. I looked at the empty walls where Robert's diplomas used to hang. He had also taken some. It wasn't out of necessity. It was for something worse. It was a message. This house is no longer yours. Little by little, I'm going to take away everything that belonged to Dad, because I am his son, and you are only his widow. That afternoon, I called Mr. Sterling and told him what had happened. Mrs. Hayes, this is a robbery. You can report it. He's my son, Mr. Sterling. I know, but he's taking advantage of that bond to hurt you. I couldn't respond because he was right. I'm going to send you a trustworthy locksmith. Change all the locks today, and if Jace comes back, don't let him in until you have a serious conversation with him. That same afternoon, they changed the locks. Each new lock was a symbol. The front door, the one to the patio, the one to the garage, as if I were sealing not only my house, but my life from the people who wanted to destroy it. When the locksmith left, I was left alone in the living room, looking at the house that suddenly felt too big, too quiet. I walked to the yard. The sun was setting. The leaves on the oak tree shone. I knelt next to the plaque Robert had left. Robert, you were right. You protected me legally, but you didn't protect me from this, from the pain of watching our son become a stranger. The wind stirred the leaves of the oak tree, and in that whisper I felt his response. It's not your fault, Ellie. Sometimes children choose paths we would never choose for them, but that doesn't mean you failed. That night I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned thinking about everything. Every time I had perhaps spoiled Jason. Every time I had given him too much. Every time Robert had told me, Ellie, you're overprotecting him. And I wouldn't listen. It was my fault. I had created a weak son, incapable of standing up to a manipulative wife. Or maybe that was just the way he was, and I had never wanted to see him. At 3 a.m., the phone rang. It was Jason. Mom, why did you change the locks? His voice didn't sound sorry. It sounded annoyed. Because you entered my house without permission and took things that weren't yours. It was my dad's toolbox. I have a right to have something of his. You had to ask for it, Jace, not steal it. I didn't steal it. I'm his son and I'm his widow, and this is my house, my space. And you violated it. There was a tense silence. Mom, are you really going to do this? Are you going to cut off your relationship with your only son over a stupid toolbox? It's not because of the box, Jace. It's because of everything. For trying to put me in an assisted living home, for making the neighbors think I'm crazy, for pressuring me to sell my house, for making me feel like a burden. I never said that. You didn't need to say it. Jason was breathing heavily on the other end. You know what, Mom? Tiffany was right. You're selfish. Dad left you that house because he knew you wouldn't be able to survive alone. But look at you. You prefer to stay there bitter and alone instead of helping your family. Every word was poison. Jason, when your father died, all I had left was this house and the memories, and you tried to take them away from me, not to help me, to help you. So don't talk to me about selfishness. I'm going to have a child, Mom. A child. And you don't care? I care. But I'm not going to sacrifice my dignity and my home for money you can earn working. So don't count me in or your grandson in. And he hung up. I stood there with the phone in my hand, listening to the dial tone, feeling the last thread that tied me to my son break. I cried until I had no more tears left. And sometime in the early morning, between the pain and exhaustion, I understood something fundamental. Loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you. And sometimes the greatest show of love is setting boundaries, even if it hurts, even if it costs you your own family. Have you ever had to choose between your peace and your family? It's one of the hardest decisions there is. If you're going through something similar or know someone who is, leave your story in the comments. Sometimes knowing we're not alone is the only thing that sustains us. The days after that phone call were the quietest of my life. The phone didn't ring again. Jason didn't come. He didn't send any messages. It was as if he had erased my existence from his life as easily as he had erased his consciousness. I continued with my routine, getting up, making coffee, watering the plants, cleaning the house. But everything felt mechanical, empty, as if I were living in a movie where I was just an extra. Mrs. Carol Jenkins came knocking every day. "Ellie, did you eat anything today?" "Yes, Carol, don't worry." "Liar. Come, I brought you soup." And she would sit with me in the kitchen in silence, just keeping me company. There are people who know how to heal with their mere presence. Carol was one of them. One afternoon, 2 weeks after my last conversation with Jason, a certified letter arrived. The envelope was blank, formal, impersonal. I opened it with trembling hands. It was from the law firm of Gonzalez, Iñaz and Associates. "We hereby address you on behalf of Mr. Jason Hayes and Mrs. Tiffany Miller, who formally request the review of Mr. Robert Hayes's will, alleging that there was improper tampering at the time of its preparation." I felt the floor move beneath my feet. I continued reading. "Our clients allege that the deceased was not of sound mind at the time of drafting the will, given that he had suffered a pre-heart attack 6 months before his death. They also request an evaluation of Mrs. Eleanor Hayes's mental state, given that she shows signs of cognitive decline that could affect her ability to manage his estate." I dropped the letter. My son was suing me. Not just me. He was tarnishing his father's memory, saying that Robert was crazy, that I had manipulated him. I called Attorney Sterling. My voice cracked. "Counselor, Jason sued me." "I know, Mrs. Hayes. I received a copy this morning. I was going to visit you this afternoon." "What does all this mean?" "It means they're trying to declare the will invalid and you incapable. If they succeed, they could assign you a legal guardian, and that guardian would have control over your assets." "They can do that?" "They can try, but they won't win. I have all of Robert's medical certificates. He was perfectly mentally healthy when he made the will. And you too, but you'll have to go to court. It will be exhausting, Mrs. Hayes. Very exhausting." That night, I couldn't sleep a wink. I walked through the house like a ghost, touching every piece of furniture, every wall, every memory. I arrived at Jason's room. He hadn't been in there since his wedding. It was still just as he left it when he left home. His bed, his diplomas, his soccer trophies. I sat on his bed, grabbed his pillow. It still held that childhood smell that never completely goes away. I remembered the first time I held him in my arms, 7 pounds of pure hope. Robert cried with happiness. "He's perfect, Ellie. He's perfect." And he was perfect for us. He was perfect. At what point did that perfect boy become the man who was now destroying me? The next day, Mr. Sterling arrived with more documents. "Mrs. Hayes, I need you to sign here. It's the response to the lawsuit. We are going to prove that both the will and your mental capacity are indisputable." I signed, but I felt defeated. "Mr. Sterling, maybe I should give them the house. Let them win. Go to the assisted living home. End all this." The lawyer looked at me with a seriousness I'd never seen in him before. "Mrs. Hayes, listen to me carefully. What's at stake isn't just a house. It's your dignity, your autonomy, your right to decide about your own life. If you give in now, you're telling Jason and Tiffany that they can trample on you whenever they want. And believe me, they won't stop there." His words shook me. "Besides," he continued, "Robert fought his whole life to give you a decent life. Do you think he would want you to give up?" I shook my head, feeling the tears fall. "So fight, Mrs. Hayes, not for the house, but for you." A week later, the summons for the preliminary hearing arrived. It would be in a month. During that month, things happened I never imagined. Tiffany started posting on social media. She didn't mention my name, but it was obvious who she was talking about. When a mother prefers money to her own grandson, #toxic family, #sadness. My husband cries every night for a mother who abandoned him. #pain, #not family. Sometimes blood doesn't make family. Number reflection. My neighbors showed me the posts, outraged, but I asked them not to respond. I wasn't going to fall for that game. Then the anonymous calls started. At 3 in the morning, at 5, only heavy breathing on the other end. I changed my number. One afternoon, I went out to buy groceries. When I returned, there was graffiti on my door. "Selfish old woman." Mrs. Carol Jenkins helped me clean it up, crying with rage. "How is this possible, Ellie? How can your own son allow this?" I had no answer, but the worst came one night, 2 weeks before the hearing. I was sleeping when I heard a noise in the yard, glass breaking. I got up, my heart pounding. From the window, I saw a shadow jumping the fence. I went down trembling. A large stone had broken the kitchen window, and tied to the stone was a note. "Give up or you'll regret it." I called the police. They came, took the report, the note, the photos, but they told me what I already knew. "Ma'am, without proof of who did it, there's not much we can do." "Do you have enemies?" I looked at the note. I recognized the type of paper. It was from the same pad that Jason used in his office. The letter was disguised, but I knew certain strokes, the A's with that little hook, the R's higher than the rest. It was my son or someone very close to him. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, a kitchen knife in my lap, waiting, but no one else came. The next day, Mr. Sterling came in furious when I told him, "This is bullying. We're going to include it in the file, and I'm going to file for a restraining order against my own son." If necessary, yes, but I knew a paper order wouldn't stop Tiffany. She was willing to do anything. The days leading up to the hearing dragged on. I barely ate, barely slept, and had lost weight. Mrs. Carol Jenkins looked at me with concern. "Ellie, you're wasting away." "I know, Carol, but I can't stop him." The night before the hearing, I knelt in front of Robert's photograph. "Love, tomorrow I'm going to confront them. Your son, the woman he chose, and I'm going to have to say out loud in front of strangers that my own son wants to steal from me. I don't know if I can." I looked into his eyes in the photograph, those eyes that always gave me strength. "Give me courage, Robert, please." That night I dreamed of him. We were in the yard under the oak tree. He held my hand. "Ellie, you are stronger than you think. You always have been. Don't be afraid." "But he's our son. He's an adult who made decisions and now has to face the consequences." "You didn't fail as a mother, Ellie. He failed as a son." I woke up with those words echoing in my mind. The day of the hearing arrived. I dressed in my best suit, the navy blue one Robert gave me for our 30th anniversary. I combed my hair carefully and put on minimal makeup. I wanted everyone to see that I wasn't crazy, that I was perfectly sane, that I knew exactly what was going on. Mrs. Carol Jenkins insisted on accompanying me. 2 other neighbors, Rosa and Carmen, also came. "You're not alone, Ellie," Carol told me in the taxi. We arrived at the courthouse. It was a gray, cold, impersonal building. I saw them in the waiting room. Jason was sitting with Tiffany. She already had a noticeable belly. 6 months pregnant. She was wearing a white dress as if she were an innocent victim. Jason didn't look at me. He had his eyes fixed on the floor. Tiffany did look at me with a cold, calculating smile, and then she did something that chilled my blood. She slowly stroked her stomach as if to say, "This is what you're going to lose, your grandson." I took a deep breath. I wasn't going to let him see me weak. We entered the courtroom. The judge was an older man with a serious expression. Mr. Sterling was next to me. On my other side, Jason's lawyer, a young man in an expensive suit and an arrogant smile. The hearing began. Jason's lawyer spoke first with a dramatic, almost theatrical voice. He painted a picture of me as a senile, manipulative woman who had taken advantage of Robert's illness to keep everything for himself. "My client, Mr. Jason Hayes, only seeks to protect his mother from herself and protect his late father's legacy." Every word was a lie dressed in concern. Then it was Mr. Sterling's turn. Calmly, with data, with documents, he proved that Robert was perfectly healthy when he made the will, and that I was too. That the house had been acquired by me before marriage. "The only thing my client has done is defend what legally belongs to her. The only thing Mr. Jason Hayes has done is try to strip his mother of her assets and her dignity." The judge asked me to testify. I stood up and walked to the stand, my legs shaking. Jason's lawyer questioned me first. "Mrs. Hayes, don't you think it's selfish to stay in such a big house when your son has a family to support?" "It's not selfish to defend what's mine." "Your grandson doesn't care." "I care, but I'm not going to allow them to use my grandson as an excuse to steal from me." "Steal from him? Such strong words to speak of your own son." "They're the right words for what's going on." The lawyer smiled as if he had won something. "How old are you, Mrs. Hayes?" 65. "And don't you think that at your age it would be safer to be in a specialized residence?" "I believe that at my age I have the right to decide where I want to live, and I choose to live in my house, the house that my husband and I built with our own hands." I looked at Jason then, straight in the eyes. "The house where I raised my son, where I loved him, where I gave him everything, and where now he's trying to destroy me." Jason lowered his gaze. I saw his hands trembling. The judge took the floor. "Mrs. Hayes, one last question. If your son apologized right now, would you forgive him?" The courtroom fell absolutely silent. I looked at Jason. I waited for him to look up, to look at me, to say something, but he didn't. Tiffany squeezed his arm as if warning him not to speak, and then I understood everything. "Your Honor," I said in a calm but firm voice, "forgiveness is something that happens when there is repentance. My son is not sorry. He's here because someone brought him, but his heart is not here. So no, at this moment I cannot forgive what has not been acknowledged." The judge nodded. "I will make my decision in a week." The session was adjourned. We left the courtroom. Mrs. Carol Jenkins hugged me. "You were incredible, Ellie." But I didn't feel incredible. I felt broken. I saw Jason leave with Tiffany. She was talking on the phone, upset. He walked behind like a ghost. For a second our eyes met. I saw pain in his gaze, shame, but also fear. Fear of her, of Tiffany. And I understood that I had lost my son long before this trial. I had lost him the day he said, "I do," in front of an altar. I returned home exhausted, physically and emotionally destroyed. I sat on the patio under the oak tree. I touched the plaque, Robert. I did it. I faced them, but I feel empty. The wind moved the leaves, and in that silence I found peace, because although I had lost my son, I hadn't lost my dignity, and sometimes that is all we have left. The week of waiting was the longest of my life. Every time the phone rang, I jumped. Every time I heard a car outside, I thought it was Mr. Sterling with news. But the days passed, slow, heavy, like walking in mud. Mrs. Carol Jenkins kept coming every day, sometimes with food, sometimes just with her presence. "Ellie, have you thought about what you're going to do if you win?" "I haven't thought about anything, Carol, just surviving one more day." "And if you lose?" I stayed silent. That possibility terrified me, but something inside me had changed. I was no longer afraid of losing the house. I was afraid of losing my soul in the process. "If I lose, Carol, at least I'll know that I fought, that I didn't let myself be trampled on. That's the only thing I can take with me." Friday morning, exactly 1 week after the hearing, the phone rang. It was Attorney Sterling. "Mrs. Hayes, I have the judge's ruling." My heart was beating so hard I thought it would jump out of my chest. "You won, Mrs. Hayes. You won everything." My legs gave way. I had to sit down. "What? What did the judge say?" "That the lawsuit is inadmissible, that the will is valid, that you are of sound mind, and also ordered Jason and Tiffany to pay the court costs and issued a fine for frivolous litigation." "What does that mean?" "It means the judge found the lawsuit groundless and was filed just to annoy you. Ellie, it's an absolute victory." I hung up the phone and didn't feel joy. I felt tired, a deep tiredness that reaches down to the bone. I had won legally, but I had lost my son. What kind of victory was that? That afternoon, I walked through the house, every room, every corner. I touched it as if I were seeing it for the first time or the last time. I wasn't sure. I got to Jason's room, opened his closet. His high school clothes were still hanging there. His sneakers, his trophies. I took one out. First place in soccer, boys division, 1995. I remembered that day. Robert shouting in the stands, Jason running toward us with the trophy held high. His eyes shone with happiness. "We did it, Dad, we did it!" Where was that child? Now I put the trophy away again, closed the closet, and closed that chapter of my life too. The next day, another letter arrived. This time it wasn't certified. Someone had slipped it under the door. The handwriting was Jason's. "Mom, I don't know if you'll read this. You probably hate me. And you're right. We lost it. Tiffany is furious. She says it's your fault, that you did this to us. But I know the truth. I was the one who did this to you. I let myself be driven by ambition, by wanting to give Tiffany everything she asked for, by being afraid of losing her. And in the process, I lost you. Dad must be very disappointed in me. I am too. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I just want you to know that I'm sorry for everything. Every hurtful word, every selfish decision. The house is yours. It always was. And me, I don't know who I am anymore. Jace. I read the letter 3 times. Tears fell onto the paper, erasing some of the words. My son was broken, and a part of me wanted to run to find him, hug him, tell him everything would be okay. But the other part, the wise part that Robert had taught me to listen, knew this wasn't going to be resolved with a hug. Jason had to find his way alone. That night I made a decision. I called Mr. Sterling. Mr. Sterling, I need you to draw up a document. Tell me, Mrs. Hayes. I want the house clearly registered as my absolute property, without any ambiguity, and I want to make my own will. Of course. And who do you want to leave the house to? I was silent for a moment. For Jason, when I die, I want the house to be his, but on one condition. What is it? That he can't sell it until 10 years have passed after my death, and if he sells it before that time, the entire proceeds will be donated to an assisted living foundation. I heard Mr. Sterling right. It's a very specific clause, Mrs. Hayes. I know, but I need Jason to understand something. This house won't be money, it's history, it's memory, and it deserves respect. And if he doesn't comply, then at least I'll help other people who, unlike me, did end up in an assisted living home without any option. The money will do some good in some way. The lawyer sighed with admiration. Mrs. Hayes, are you a wise woman? I'm not wise, counselor. I'm just tired of fighting. A week later, I received an unexpected call. It was from a hospital. Mrs. Eleanor Hayes? Yes, it's me. I'm calling from the General Hospital. Your daughter-in-law, Mrs. Tiffany Miller, was admitted to the emergency room. She had complications during the pregnancy. She's stable, but they needed an emergency C-section. The baby is in an incubator. I felt like the world had stopped. And my son Jason is there? Yes, ma'am. He was the one who gave us your number. He says he needs to see you. I hung up the phone, trembling. I look at my clock. It was 9 p.m. It was raining outside. Mrs. Carol Jenkins was with me, drinking coffee. She saw my face. What happened? Tiffany had the baby. There were complications. Jason needs me. Carol took my hand. Are you going to go? I looked out the window. The rain beat hard against the glass. I don't know, Carol. They hurt me so much. But he's your grandson, Ellie. I know, but I'm scared. Afraid that they'll use me again. Afraid of trusting again and being destroyed again. Carol squeezed my hand. Only you know what your heart can bear, Ellie. No one else can decide for you. I sat for another half hour, thinking, crying, praying. And then I remembered something Robert told me when Jason was little and he fought with his best friend. Ellie, forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. Forgiving means you're no longer going to carry the weight of resentment. But that doesn't mean you have to return to the same place where you were hurt. I understood then what I had to do. I put on my coat, grabbed my bag. Are you going to the hospital? Carol asked. Yes, but not for Jason, not for Tiffany. I'm going for that baby, because he's innocent of all this and deserves to meet his grandmother at least once. I arrived at the hospital at 10 p.m. The fluorescent lights hurt my eyes. The smell of disinfectant made my stomach churn. I asked at the front desk for Tiffany Miller. They directed me to the 4th floor. I went up in a slow elevator full of tired, sick, worried people like me. In the hallway, sitting on a green plastic chair, was Jason. He had his head in his hands. He hadn't seen me coming. I approached slowly. When my shoes clicked on the floor, he looked up. His eyes were red, swollen from crying. He had deep, dark circles under his eyes. He looked 10 years older. Mom, you came. I came for my grandson, not for you. The words came out harsher than I intended, but I needed him to understand. Jason nodded as if I'd hit him. He's in the incubator. It's a boy. His name is Robert, like Dad. I felt something break in my chest. Can I see him? Yes, come. We walked in silence to the neonatal ward. Through the glass, I saw several incubators. Jason pointed to one. There was my grandson, so small, so fragile, with wires and monitors everywhere, but he was alive. He was breathing. He's premature, Jason explained, his voice breaking. 7 months. The doctors say he's going to be fine, but he needs to stay here for at least a month. I stared at that tiny baby. His eyes were closed, his little hands the size of my thumb. And then, without planning it, without thinking, I began to pray softly, almost in a whisper. Virgin Mary, take care of this child. May he not pay for his parents' mistakes. May he have a full life of love, of peace, of second chances. Jason cried beside me. Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on my grandson. Jason, I'm not going to tell you that everything is okay, because it isn't. You and Tiffany hurt me a lot, and that can't be erased with an I'm sorry. I know, but that baby is innocent and has the right to have a grandmother. So I'm going to be here for him. Not for you, not for Tiffany, for Robbie. Jason nodded, still crying. And Tiffany? I asked. She's sedated. She hemorrhaged. The doctors said they almost lost her. I felt no joy at her suffering, only tiredness. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. Mom, do you think one day... I don't know, Jace. Time will tell. Now I just want to focus on this baby, on making sure that she comes out okay. The rest, we'll see. I stayed for another hour looking at my grandson. Then I said goodbye. I'll come back tomorrow, I said. Thanks, Mom. I didn't reply. I just left. In the taxi back, I looked at the city through the window, the lights blurred by the rain, and I understood something fundamental. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need Jason to suffer for me to feel good. Life was already teaching him. The premature baby, the scare with Tiffany, the debt from the lawsuit, the public shame. I just needed to protect my peace and be there for whoever really needed me. That innocent baby who bore my husband's name. Karma didn't need my help. It was already in motion, and I could finally rest. The months that followed were strange, like living in two worlds at the same time. On one side was my life, my house, my routines, my recovered peace. I watered the plants, cooked, read, watched my shows. Mrs. Carol Jenkins kept coming over for coffee. Life remained simple and peaceful. On the other side was the hospital. I went every day to see my grandson. Sometimes I would spend hours looking at him through the glass, whispering to him, even though he couldn't hear me. Robbie, little Robbie, your grandfather would be so proud of you. You're a warrior. Jason also went every day. At first he tried to talk to me, apologize, explain, but I kept the conversations short, focused on the baby. How did he wake up? What did the doctors say? He's already gained weight. Nothing more, nothing personal, and he understood. Over time, he stopped trying. It was just the two of us, united by that child, but separated by an abyss neither of us knew how to cross. Tiffany was hospitalized for 3 weeks. The bleeding had been severe. She almost died. The doctors told her she wouldn't be able to have any more children. When they finally discharged her, I saw her in the hospital hallway. She was in a wheelchair, pale, gaunt. She no longer had that arrogant smile. She no longer wore tight, shiny clothes. She looked empty. Our eyes met for a second. I waited for her to say something, to insult me, to blame me, but she just lowered her gaze as if she were ashamed to see me. And I felt no satisfaction, only sadness. The baby left the hospital 6 weeks later. He weighed almost 6 pounds. He was healthy. The doctors said it had been a miracle. The day he was discharged, Jason called me. Mom, I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but could you come to the house when we arrive with Robbie, just for a little while, so you can see his room, so you can see that we're trying to do things right? I hesitated, but something in his voice moved me. Okay, I'll go. They lived in a small apartment on Eastwood Heights, the 3rd floor without an elevator. The walls needed paint. The furniture looked old and battered. When I walked in, the smell of damp hit me. It wasn't a bad place, but it wasn't what Tiffany had dreamed of either. It wasn't the big house in the hills she wanted. It was what they could afford after the debts from the lawsuit. Tiffany was sitting on the couch with the baby in her arms. When she saw me walk in, she tensed. Mrs. Hayes. Tiffany. The silence was awkward. Jason tried to break it. Do you want to hold Robbie, Mom? Tiffany carefully handed the baby to me. I took him in my arms and felt like time had stopped. He looked so much like Jason when he was born. The same big eyes, the same upturned little nose. Hello, my love, I whispered. I finally have you in my arms. The baby looked at me and smiled, or at least seemed to. The doctors say that at that age it's just reflexes, but I know what I saw. Tiffany watched us. Her eyes were moist. Mrs. Hayes, I want to ask for your forgiveness. I looked up, surprised. For everything, by everything. By pressuring you, by speaking ill of you, by everything. Her voice broke. I thought money was the important thing, that with money we would be happy. But I almost lost my son. I almost died, and I realized it wasn't worth it. None of it was worth it. I continued rocking the baby without responding. I don't expect you to forgive me, she continued. I just want you to know that I'm sorry. I really looked at Jason. He was also crying silently. Tiffany, I finally said, you don't ask for forgiveness. You earn it with actions, with time, with real changes. She nodded. I understand, but I can tell you something. This baby deserves to grow up in a family without resentment, so I'm going to try for him. I don't promise to forget, but I'm going to try to let go of the pain. Tiffany covered her face and cried. I stayed for another hour, then I said goodbye. In the taxi back, I thought about everything that had happened, about how life, without me lifting a finger, had put everyone in their place. Tiffany had lost her health, her ability to have more children, her arrogance. Jason had lost his pride, his peace of mind, his relationship with me. They were now living in a small apartment, with debts, with fears, with regrets. And I was still in my house, with my peace, with my dignity, with my memories intact. I hadn't punished them. Life had. The following months were filled with small but significant changes. Jason began to visit me, at first once a month, then every 15 days, always with the baby, never with Tiffany. We didn't talk much, but being together, even in silence, was a beginning. One afternoon, 6 months after Robbie was born, Jason was in the yard playing with the baby under the oak tree. I was making lemonade in the kitchen. Suddenly, I heard him speak, not to me, but to the baby. Look, Robbie, your great-grandfather planted this tree. Your grandfather named you after him. And your grandmother? Your grandmother is the strongest woman I know. I looked out the window. Jason was holding the baby in his arms, pointing to the tree. When you grow up, son, I want you to understand something. Sometimes we make mistakes, big mistakes, and we have to live with that. But we also have to learn. Your father learned late, very late, but he learned. He knelt next to the plaque Robert had left at the roots of the tree. Do you see this? Your grandfather knew that true love isn't possession, it's protection. He protected your grandmother even after he died, and I didn't. I didn't know how to protect her when he was alive. I went out to the patio. Jason stood up, wiping away his tears. Mom, I didn't know you were there. It's okay. We stayed silent, staring at the baby, trying to grab a leaf from the oak tree. You know, Jace, I said finally, your father once told me that you're not measured by the mistakes you make, but by how you respond after making them. Jason looked at me. You made mistakes, big mistakes. You hurt me more than you can imagine. I know, but you're trying to change. And that counts. Jason sank into a patio chair, hugging his son. I don't know if you'll ever be able to fully forgive me, Mom, but I promise you that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be the son you deserved from the beginning. I didn't respond with words. I just sat by his side. And the three of us, under the oak tree that Robert had planted 40 years ago, remained silent. A different silence, not of pain, but of healing. A week later, something unexpected happened. I was at the market buying vegetables when I heard a familiar voice. Ellie! I turned around. It was Gabriella, a neighbor of Tiffany's from her old building. Gabriella, how are you? Fine, fine. Hey, did you hear about Tiffany? What happened? Gabriella lowered her voice as if sharing a secret. She separated from Jace. I felt the ground move. What? Yes. Apparently she met someone else, a businessman. She went with him to Monterey, left the baby with Jace. I couldn't believe it. And Jason is devastated. He was left alone with the baby. I think he's already moved back in with you. No, he's not with me. I ran back home. I called Jason. He didn't answer. I called 10 more times. Nothing. Finally, at 8 p.m., there was a knock on my door. It was Jason, with a suitcase and the baby in his arms. He was broken, completely broken. Mom. Tiffany left me. She left. She says she doesn't want this life anymore, that she met someone who can give her what she wants. The tears fell uncontrollably. I have nowhere to go. My savings are gone. The apartment was hers. I have nothing, Mom, only Robbie, and I don't even know if I can take care of him alone. I looked at my son, at the 40-year-old man who was once again the scared little boy who needed his mother. And I looked at the sleeping baby, oblivious to all the chaos. I opened the door fully. Come in. Jason collapsed in my arms, crying like he hadn't cried since he was a child. Forgive me, Mom. Forgive me. I lost everything. The house I wanted, the family I loved, and all of it for the pursuit of money that wasn't mine. I hugged him, and in that hug there was pain, but also liberation. Jason, life has a curious way of teaching us. Sometimes we need to lose everything to understand what really matters. That night, I prepared Jason's room, put on clean sheets. I made a makeshift crib for the baby with pillows and blankets. The three of us had dinner together. Vegetable soup, bread, coffee, like in the old days, but different, more conscious, more humble. Before going to sleep, Jason stayed in the doorway of my room. Mom, thank you for not closing the door on me, for not charging me for everything I did to you. Jason, resentment only poisons the one who carries it, and I'm too old to carry poisons. And now what am I going to do? Now you're going to raise your son, you're going to work, you're going to learn to be the man your father was. Little by little, without rushing, but with honesty. Jason nodded. And Tiffany made her decision. Now she'll have to live with that, just as you lived with yours. Life always takes its toll, Jace. Always. I closed the door and sat on my bed. I looked at the photograph of Robert on the nightstand. Love, our son is back. Broken, but back. And we have a grandson who bears your name. I know you're watching over us from wherever you are. That night I dreamed of Robert. We were young again, dancing at our wedding. He whispered in my ear, "You see, Ellie, I told you everything would be okay. Justice doesn't need revenge, only patience." I woke up with tears on my cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of peace, because I finally understood. I hadn't won by destroying anyone. I had won by standing my ground, with dignity, with boundaries, with love, but also with self-respect. And life had taken care of the rest. Tiffany once called me selfish for not giving them my house. Years later, she chose another man's money over her own son. Jason once called me crazy for not wanting to go to an assisted living home. Now he had lost everything and was returning to the house he tried to sell. Life always takes its toll. Always. And I, who was made to feel guilty so many times, was finally at peace because I had learned the most important lesson. You don't need to destroy those who hurt you. You just need to protect your dignity and let time do its work. Karma doesn't rush, but it always, always comes. Have you ever seen how life takes care of justice without you lifting a finger? Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply wait. Let me know in the comments if you've experienced something similar. It's been 3 years since that night Jason knocked on my door with a suitcase and a baby in his arms. 3 years in which this house was once again filled with life, with a child's laughter, with little steps running through the yard, with the word grandma pronounced with that little voice that melts my heart. Grandma, look, a butterfly. Robbie, my 3-year-old grandson, runs toward me, pointing at a yellow butterfly fluttering near the oak tree. His eyes sparkle with the same curiosity I saw in his father's 40 years ago. Yes, my love. She's beautiful, isn't she? Like you, Grandma. I laugh. That boy has the ability to brighten the saddest day with a single phrase. Jason comes out of the house with a cup of coffee. He sits next to me on the patio bench. He's 43 now, a few gray hairs on his temples, wrinkles around his eyes that weren't there before. But there's something different in his gaze. A peace he didn't have before, a humility he earned through pain. What are you thinking about, Mom? About everything. How did we get here, Jace? He watches his son run after the butterfly and smiles sadly. Me too. Sometimes I can't believe everything that happened. Everything I almost lost because of ambition. The important thing is what you learned, son. Jason now works as a construction supervisor, just like his father. He doesn't earn much, but he's honest. He gets up at 5 in the morning, takes Robbie to daycare, works 10 hours, picks him up, they come home. We have dinner together every night, the three of us as a family. It's not the family he dreamed of. There's no wife, no big house, no luxuries. But there's love, there's respect, there's peace. And that's finally enough. Mom, Jason says, looking at his coffee, yesterday I got a message from Tiffany. My heart tightens. What did she want? She says she wants to see Robbie, that she's changed, that the man she left with turned out not to be what he promised, and that you told him he can see him for an hour here at home with me present. I look at him in surprise. Are you sure? No, but Robbie deserves to know his mother, even if she doesn't deserve him. I'm not going to do the same thing she did. Take a son away from his family. I feel proud. My son learned. He finally learned. You're a good man, Jace. Your father would be proud. His eyes fill with tears. I wish Dad could see this, see us here at peace. He sees us, son, of that I'm sure. 2 days later, Tiffany arrived, knocking on the door at 4 in the afternoon. When I opened it, I almost didn't recognize her. She wasn't wearing expensive clothes anymore. She no longer had that arrogant look. She looked small, scared. Mrs. Hayes. Tiffany. I know I have no right to be here, but I want to see my son. Jason appeared behind me with Robbie by the hand. The boy looked at her curiously without recognizing her. Who's Dad? Jason knelt beside him. She's your mother, son. She came to meet you. Tiffany covered her mouth so as not to cry. She knelt too. Hello, Robbie. You're so big. The boy looked at her suspiciously. Why don't you live with us? The question fell like a stone. Tiffany didn't know how to answer. I made mistakes, son. Very big mistakes. And I'm not going to live with you anymore. I commit them. I'm going to try never to do it again. Robbie thought for a moment with the seriousness of wise children. Okay, you can play with me, but you can't yell at my grandmother. She's good. Tiffany looked at me, and in her eyes I saw something I'd never seen before. Genuine regret. I'll never disrespect your grandmother again, Robbie. I promise. She stayed for an hour, played with the boy in the yard, listened to him talk about his toys, about daycare, about his grandfather, Robert, who is in heaven. When she left, she hugged Jason. Thank you for not closing the door on me. I know I don't deserve your kindness. I'm not doing it for you, Tiff. I'm doing it for him. She nodded and left. That night, as I put Robbie to bed, the boy asked me, Grandma, why did my mom leave? Because sometimes people get confused about what's important, my love. But the good thing is that they can learn. Like my dad? I was surprised by his intelligence. Yes, like your dad. And you never got confused, did you, Grandma? Oh, yes. I got confused many times, too. But your grandfather Robert taught me not to lose the most important thing, dignity. What is dignity? It's knowing your worth and not letting anyone make you feel less than, not even the people you love. The boy thought for a moment. I believe you are worth a lot, Grandma. I hugged him, feeling the tears fall. And you, my love, are worth everything. The months continued to pass. Life found its rhythm. One afternoon, while Jason was at work and Robbie was at daycare, I sat alone in the yard. I looked at the oak tree. The leaves shone in the sun. I knelt beside the plaque Robert had left so many years ago. For Ellie, my love, this house is yours. Always was, always will be, are. I touched the letters with my fingers. Robert. I kept my promise. I defended our house. I defended our dignity. And now it's full of life again. Our grandson runs through this yard where you planted this tree. Our son learned, even if it was the hard way. The wind stirred the leaves, and I felt his presence like so many times before. I know you're watching over me. I know you're watching over all of us. That night, Jason found me looking at old photographs in the living room. What do you see, Mom? Our story, everything we lived through. Jason sat next to me. Do you regret anything? I thought for a long moment. I regret having kept quiet for so long, having accepted disrespect for fear of losing my family, but I don't regret having stood up for myself when necessary.
I do regret, Jason said, his voice breaking, everything. Of having made you feel like a burden, of having tried to take your home away from you, of not having defended you when Tiffany attacked you.
I know, son, and that's what makes you different. Now true repentance transforms. Jason took my hand. Do you know what hurts me the most? That Dad died without seeing this, without seeing that I finally understood everything he tried to teach me. He sees it, Jace, and he's proud. I feel it. We remain silent, looking at the photographs. Robert and I at our wedding. Jason as a baby. The house when we had just bought it. So many years, so much life. Mom, Jason finally said, when you're gone, this house is going to be sacred to me. I'm never going to sell it. I'm going to leave it to Robbie and he to his children, so that they will always remember that a woman who taught us what really matters lived here. I couldn't hold back my tears. That's all I needed to hear, son. It's been 3 years since that terrible night my son sued me. 3 years in which life taught me the most important lesson. You don't need to get revenge on those who hurt you. You just need to defend yourself, set limits, maintain your dignity. And time, that silent teacher, takes care of the rest. Tiffany lost her son because she chased money. Now she lives alone with a man who also did not turn out to be what he promised. He comes once a month to see Robbie. The boy treats her politely, but not with the love he has for his father or me. That love was lost and cannot be recovered with sporadic visits. Jason lost years of peace, money, his marriage, but he gained something more valuable: humility, awareness, a second chance to be the man his father was. And I won the most important battle of my life, the battle for my dignity, for my right to live in peace, in the house my husband and I built with love. It wasn't easy. There were nights of crying, days of loneliness, moments when I doubted myself. But it was worth it because now, at 68, I can look in the mirror and see a woman who respected herself, who didn't let herself be trampled on, who loved but with limits, who forgave but without forgetting. If my story reached you, if you're listening to this now, I want you to know something important. Never, ever allow anyone to make you feel worthless, not even your own family, especially your own family. True love doesn't destroy. True love respects, protects, honors. And if someone asks you to give up your peace, your home, your dignity in the name of love, that's not love, it's manipulation. Stand up for yourself, set boundaries, and trust that life will take care of justice. It may take time, it may hurt while you wait, but it always, always comes. Last night, as I slept, I dreamed of Robert for the last time. We were young, dancing in the yard under the stars. He whispered to me, "Well done, my Ellie, well done." And I knew that everything, absolutely everything, had been worth it. This morning, I got up early, made coffee, watered the plants, looked at the oak tree. Robbie, my grandson, has already woken up. I hear his giggles in the room. In a moment, he'll run down shouting, "Grandma!" and hug my legs like he does every morning. Jason will leave for work. He'll kiss me on the forehead and say, "Thank you, Mom, for everything." And I will stay here, in my house, in my yard, under my oak tree, at peace, finally, at peace. If my story helps just one woman open her eyes, to defend herself, to not allow herself to be trampled on in the name of family love, it will have been worth it. Every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of pain, it will all have been worth it. Because in the end, the only thing we take with us from this life is the dignity with which we lived it. And I, Eleanor Hayes, lived mine with my head held high. Thank you for listening to me until the end. If this story touched your heart, subscribe and activate the bell to hear more stories of women who transformed their pain into wisdom. Each day, a woman, a life lesson. Share this story with someone you love. Sometimes a story like this can change a whole day. May God bless you, and until next time.